Well, you've got to feed these guys, and also you've got to be able to lay gold on them because that's what they want. You have to be able to hand them a gold ring when they do something wonderful, or give a skald a gold cup or something. So you have to have a huge amount of treasure, and if you have a huge amount of treasure, then you become an important guy, and which is the whole point of Harold in going through these palace plunders, which was where you accumulated a lot of gold. The Viking lord was a man who attracted men to him by power of personality, and he had to have a reputation for victory, for getting out there, taking you someplace, getting you a big victory, and not getting you killed. So men accumulated at these halls, and they would have huge feasts, and everybody got lots of gold, and everybody drank lots of mead, and then every once in a while they'd all get together and take their swords and go off and kill somebody. But for the most part, it was this great Viking hall thing that was kind of the center of Viking life.
In the Great Hall, Viking political deals were made, allegiances forged, and power wielded.
It was a very fluid system that allowed Vikings to take advantage of, whatever the situation was, and to move and reformulate. And it could flip over in an instant if a leader fell or was killed in battle or humiliated or something happened, and somebody else would rise up immediately, often from a totally different direction.
With Kiev as his model, King Harold set out to create a major trading center at a strategic seaside town where goods from all over the world would be available. The town was Oslo, destined to be one of the region's great ports. King Harold knew it was trade that would unite the Viking people and bring them the wealth and stability they desired. The markets of Oslo brimmed with goods from Viking farms, wheat and vegetables, furs and fabrics. Viking longboats brought back goods from all over the known world: spices, gold, textiles, precious stones and slaves. Pottery and glass from Germany were traded, silver jewelry from France, and coins from the faraway Arab lands. The Viking people became shrewd merchants as Oslo grew and prospered. The ordinary life of this trading community was revealed in the goods interred with them: gold, engraved weapons, jewelry, the ordinary wooden goods of the Vikings themselves. But the development of a major trade center only whet Harold's appetite for greater riches and control.
Harold decides a bigger target is in order, and that target is England. And he gets on a boat, number of boats of course. He's joined by the rebellious brother of the King of England, and off Harold Harthrothi goes.
As he looked toward England in the future, Harold surely imagined his own empire stretching as far as his longboats could take him. The one-time refugee had gained astonishing power and political clout among his belligerent people. He had already conquered the toughest of his own Viking enemies. His actions were met with little resistance. England and all its wealth seemed within easy reach of his iron grasp. But awaiting Harold and his men was a tough and disciplined army, and a struggle greater than any he had faced. In late September 1066 AD, a rider bore dark, urgent news for the city of York. The Viking king Harald Hardrada was approaching. The English knew well his reputation for brutality. Only swift action and great courage could stop him. Harold began his conquest on the coast, and after winning a quick succession of violent conflicts, his victory looked all but assured. York seemed prepared to surrender. Harold and a contingent of his troops headed for Stamford Bridge, some 7 miles from the city. He'd expected York's leaders to pay homage and to present hostages as tribute. In fact, Harold was so convinced that the north of England was already his, he had less than the full complement of his men with him. And they left behind their armour. But the English were not so casual. Their king, Harold Godwinson, marched his soldiers in double time through the forest to cut off the Viking army. The swordsmen wore chainmail, and the archers were well armed.
When the English army shows up, at least the sagas tell us, they're completely surprised as they see the armor shining in the sun of the midday, coming closer and closer to them. They don't know who it is. But as it gets closer and closer, they recognize who it is.
According to King Harold's saga to the Vikings, it looked like a sheet of ice when the weapons glistened. A fateful decision took Harold. Rather than retreat and wait for the rest of his troops to arrive from the ships, he wanted to fight. At one point, the English pulled back. Harold sensed victory, and his forces broke formation.
There's a story. One warrior stood on the bridge and held off all the English. These were tiny, tiny armies, but that's not unheard of in the Middle Ages, where battles with large numbers of armies are not that common.
According to King Harold's saga, Harold rallied his men with these words: "Carry your head always high in battle, where swords seek to shatter the skulls of doomed warriors."
The guy on the bridge held them off, but then once he was jabbed, they were able to get to Harold.
With the bridge open, the English soldiers poured down on the lightly armoured Viking forces, cutting through them like a scythe. The battle was savage. The Viking used all their skill and courage, but one after another the Vikings fell, their blood soaking into the English soil in an appalling slaughter. The Viking sagas recount the struggle. The fight-sharp leader's heart wavered not. The strong king showed all the greatest courage in the thunder of the fight. His bloody sword wounded the enemy to death. In the midst of the battle, an arrow, well aimed or guided by fate, lodged in the throat of Harold Hardrada. Harold's reinforcements arrived late in the day, too late. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the Vikings faced an almost total rout. By nightfall, the Viking defeat was absolute. Harold Hardrada arrived in England in September 1066 with thousands of soldiers and the grandest ambition, but found only ruin and death.
Harold Hardrada had 270 ships to bring over his army from Norway, and only 30 returned.
In the decades following, the Vikings continued their sporadic attacks, but none reached as far or came so close to empire as Harold at his last stand. In a matter of weeks, a new era of European history took hold. By the time of Harold's death in 1066, Viking influence had spread deep roots throughout world culture, trade, and history, and sowed the seeds of Viking downfall, assimilation, their absorption into the lands they colonized, and the spreading, unifying force of Christianity brought about their end as much as any single defeat in battle.
Essentially, Europe's history changes. Russia is now Russia, land of the Vikings. The Rus were Vikings. Normandy is now land of the Normans. The Normans were Vikings. Ultimately, the Normans would conquer England. And so their legacy is extensive in the history of Europe.
As warriors, as settlers, as explorers and traders, Vikings were agents of an extraordinary social and political change, spurring global economic growth and the fortification of Europe, along with the development of national identities, advances in shipbuilding and navigation. Their brutal raids gave Vikings an enduring reputation as barbarians, but in their quest for opportunity, for riches and control, the Vikings didn't destroy Western civilization. They enriched it.